Hello and welcome to another bodgit and leggit video. Today we are going to do back springs. Now this happens to be a 2004 Ford Fusion, but most cars are the same, providing your spring is separate to your shock. If your spring isn't, then this is a different way of doing it, but providing your spring is separate to your shock, they are fairly simple to do. You have a cross member coming across which connects the two wheels together, a shock and a spring. That's basically it. And as you can see, this spring is obviously a few inches longer than the other one, because once it's in, it actually compresses a little bit. It's to stop it from jumping out when you go over the road. Simple to change. I know I'm on a lift, but you can even do this when you're on the floor if you jack up the car, and then what you really need is get some sort of jack on your back axle cross member here, because you do need that. If you just take out these screws without propping the jack, it can just fall down. You can put pressure on your brake pipes. You don't want to do it. So as you can see, I've supported it with my gearbox stand here. It's just 2 bolts, 15mm bolt, 18mm nut behind, but the nut is a captive nut, so the nut's basically welded to the frame. So all you got to do is clean it with wire, brush, put some WD-40 on, which I have done, and we'll just get out this bolt. Now once my compressor's turned off, I'll turn the camera back on. Right, so now you can hear me because the compressor's off. As you can see, all I've done is I've taken off the other bolts. There's 2 15mm bolts, that's all I've done. As you can see, the shocks are kind of loose at the bottom, so that's all I've done. I've got the middle supported with my gearbox stand. You can use a jack or anything like that. And all I'm going to do, it's very simple. You do have to be careful. Don't be too close to these, because if you're here and you let it down, that spring could come out and hit you on the old noggin. So you want to be careful. They shouldn't really, because they're not under that much pressure, but they are under a little bit of pressure. All I'm going to do is release the pressure slowly. And as you can see, hopefully you can see this whole thing is dropping. Now I'm controlling the pressure because we've got handbrake cables and brake lines. You don't just want to let this fall, because you could snap brake lines or handbrake cables. So let's let this down. It will come to a point where it will stop. As you can see, our springs are now loose. Now there is a few other ways of doing this. You can always put spring compressors on to compress your spring without undoing the shocks, but the problem is the spring compressors can be very difficult to get off, and this is only 2 bolts. Believe me, it is not difficult to do. The spring compressors, I don't like using them, they are quite dangerous. And now all I should be able to do is just pull this spring off. Now what we have to be careful of, I don't know if the camera's going to pick this up, but this shock is just really rusty on the top and the bottom, and eventually they break. This one hasn't broke yet, but it's not far off. But also, when it's an old spring, I don't know if you can even see that, even in the middle, the spring's going. What happens when the spring gets old and rusty, it compresses, and it might not be as big as the original spring. Now, what you have to make sure of is certain springs, they might have a way to go in. So they could have like an upside down, well not so much an upside down, but there could be a top and a bottom to the spring. These ones are universal, but some cars might have slightly different ones. Now the problem with this one, the camera's going to show it, you can see the end of that, it's all misshapen, and when I put it up, if you can see the edge of the spring has been pushed down inside itself. If you then compare it to the new one, as you can see the edge of the spring, I can get my finger in there. So this spring is actually maybe 10 mil actually bigger, because as you can see, this has got pushed down into the spring. It's just gone rusty. The weight of the car over the years has just compressed the spring. So this spring hopped out and went back in. It made a huge bang, and we actually thought the springs were broke, but as it turns out they're not. But as you can see, they are bent and twisted. So just because the spring isn't necessarily broke doesn't mean it doesn't need replacing. When you go over a big bump, because the spring isn't as high as it should be, it can hop out, it can do damage. So just be aware of that. Spring doesn't have to be physically snapped to be broke. Now, like I said, you just make sure you don't have a directional spring, and all you got to do, again, on the car, you'll have a rubber, you can see that, a little rubber mounting. Some cars have them on the top, the bottom, some cars don't have any. It just depends on the car, but the spring has to sit inside that little rubber mounting, and then you shove it back into the car. That's not actually in the right place, I think it's like that. That's how it goes. So it sits on it really nicely, and there you go. As you can also see, there's like this nipple sticking out which has to line up in a hole inside. All I'm going to do is line up the hole, push it in. As you can see, it just pushed in nice and easy, and just allow the spring just to hang there for the minute, and do the other side. Push this down, throw it away, push the rubber mount on top of the spring, get it so it is lining nice and flat, just like that. You might have to spin it around just to get it nice and flat. Do the same thing again, line up with the hole, push it in. Now all I've got to do is jack up the actual back axle. Make sure the springs have located in the little hole, because there's like a little lip that sticks up to stops the spring actually completely popping out. And now all I'm doing is just very slowly. Now you have to be careful when you're jacking up the car, even on the lift. If you jack it up too fast, you can actually lift the whole car and it can fall off the lift. If you're on axle stands underneath the car, it could do the same thing. So you do have to be careful. So just nice and slowly to let them compress without lifting them up too hard. I'm just waiting for them to line up. Now that looks about right there. That one's a bit low, but I'm going to get this bolt in first. Now you want to be careful, because obviously your face is very close to the spring. So that one's in. I'm going to screw this in a bit more. Not fully. It's not fully tight, but it's screwed in. Now I can pump it again to line up with this one here. Now as we can see, that one's lined up. Now I'm going to tighten them by hand, but that is essentially it. So it's a good thing just to check to make sure your springs are flat on the top, flat on the bottom. Give them a good rub to make sure, a good shake, sorry, to make sure they're not loose or anything like that. Because if they're loose now, you've got a problem. If they're loose when the suspension's fully down, you do have a problem. Now if you're putting lowering springs in, they can be loose, because when the car comes down it compresses. But you don't want standard springs to be loose. What I'm going to do now is tighten them. Now you do have to be careful, you don't want to over tighten these. There's a bolt will snap, but they need to be tight just like that. Now you want to double check them again just to make sure they're not loose, which they're not. Now, depending if you haven't got these properly lined up, you drive down the road, you might hear a bang or a twist if they just clip themselves in, but you want to make sure you've kind of got them in right before you actually lift up the back axle. It is just a bit easier. And I do find it a lot easier doing it this way than trying to mess around with the spring clamps, because the spring clamps, you know, they're going to be in here, they're awkward, they're dangerous. You drop the whole thing, lift it up, and you're not really putting that much pressure on the springs, and it's a lot safer in my opinion. Certain cars you might have to, depending on how they're all tied up, but with these ones, they're nice and simple to do. So that's really it. All we've got to do is put it on the deck and just push on the car to make sure they're actually fine, but they do look okay up here at the minute. Let's bring the car down, see what happens. Now, the car's on the floor, there's nothing underneath it. I'm just going to put my knee on here and just make sure it's springing back up straight away, which it is. It's not making any noise, it's doing what it's supposed to do. Take it for a drive just to double check, but I mean, that is really as simple as that. So look, hope it helped. Thumbs up and subscribe, and don't forget, get your hands dirty. See you for the next one.